bringing you in-depth discussion from one of the most read group of online writers covering the Edmonton Oilers. Are you ready for Oilers Overtime? Join us as we talk news, rumors, trades, player grades, game results, and more, all featured on one of the most glorified teams in the NHL, from the great one to the next one, from the boys on the bus to the decade of darkness. This is Oilers Overtime.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Oilers Overtime with the Hockey Writers. My name is Jim Parsons. We're back with our two-thirds of our regular crew. Colton Pankiw is with us. Colton, how you doing, buddy?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Doing really well. And Brian Swane is with us as well. Brian's down there in the corner, although maybe my view is different than everybody else's. Brian, how are you?
Yeah, I'm up top in my view, but yeah, I'm doing good. Doing good. How you guys doing?
Doing well, and doing really well after last night's game. That was a close one. You know, it started very chippy and didn't look like the Oilers were doing so well to start. But then they came on as the game progressed, and they ended up beating Montreal 4-1 in what I would call probably the first real glimpses of what a playoff game is going to look like. Colton, do you agree? Was that a real test last night? The Oilers win 4-1 over the Montreal Canadiens. Was that kind of our first sign that maybe this Oilers team is a playoff team?
Yeah, I mean, it just felt like a playoff game, like you said. I think that was by far the most exciting Oilers game I've watched this year. One of the most exciting games in general I've watched. And yeah, it did give me some more confidence, like getting closer to the playoffs, because it was kind of one of those things, like you said, the start of the game again, it was like, man, what's going on against Montreal? You know, they haven't really had much success against them this year, but that third period, particularly the last 10 minutes or so, they really turned it on. And yeah, like it was exciting.
Physical hockey for sure. Chippy, lots of penalties that weren't called, and then some penalties that were. Some slew foots, all sorts of crazy stuff happening in that game. Brian, what do you think as you were watching that game unfold?
You know what? They for the first 50 minutes again, I mean, it just looked like the Habs continued to have this team's number. They'd scored 7 goals against this team through five games in 50 minutes, and then just the floodgates finally opened. But you had a feeling, like you had a sense. I felt this team, and I wrote about it this week, that they needed a breakthrough against the Habs this week. And took them long enough to get it last night, but they finally got it rolling midway through the third, and then it's just like the floodgates opened. And you just kind of had the sense, and I think that was indicative of, you know, of a very, very strong team. And it almost made me think back to like the Oilers of, say, 20 years ago, when they were, you know, they get in these series with the Dallas Stars, and they would find a way to keep it close, but you could just see the skill was coming on against them. And you had a feeling that in the end that, you know, they'd ultimately break through, and we know how that would turn out. That's what happened last night. The skill ultimately won out. And I think the Oilers showed an awful lot, just in terms of their mental fortitude to soldier through and pull that one out in the end.
A lot of really good things happened in that game, and we'd seen Edmonton be shut down. Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl specifically against Montreal had not done anything. Now, Connor McDavid scored a goal that was called back, and we'll talk about that play in a minute here when it comes to Carey Price, Alex Chiasson, and all that stuff. But Connor McDavid gets off the schneid, so he gets a goal, a beauty. Ethan Bear scores one for the first time in, what was it, like 49 games, and he played really well, played over 20 minutes, and really kind of came on, and his season's getting a whole lot better, and we'll talk about that too. But there was a lot of good things that happened here. For me watching that game, though, I was just really pleasantly, I wouldn't say surprised, but pleased with the fact that the Oilers just didn't quit. They had that game, and it was rough, and it was mean, it was nasty. It was exactly what Montreal is built to do. Bergevin went out and added size to this team and really built them to be a playoff kind of team that'll beat you up. And Edmonton just didn't quit. They just sort of said, you know what, okay, let's roll with it. Let's come back. And like I said, the first period wasn't great, but the second got better, and the third was really good. And once, you know, Jake Allen got in there, and it was shown that they could get a puck past him, and it just sort of, you could see the momentum really switch, right? And that's what it was really cool. Like, Colton, how big of a deal do you think it is now that the Oilers know, not that they didn't think they could, but now that they know they can beat the Montreal Canadiens? Because it's Montreal and Toronto. Those are the two teams that Edmonton seemed to have the most trouble with in this North Division. They got Ottawa's number for sure. They were able to beat Vancouver. Winnipeg, they're doing all right against. But Montreal and Toronto had their number. And now Edmonton knows, in Montreal's style of game, the Oilers could win.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. Obviously, I think if they want to go on any type of playoff run, they'll have to play they'll have to play one of those teams, perhaps two, depending on what happens with the standings here. So yeah, I think it's massive. I think even with Toronto there, like you had said earlier in the year, it was kind of, you're starting to question if maybe they're in their heads a bit. And yeah, I think they just proved, like Brian said earlier, I think eventually skill just takes over. And that's kind of Montreal's one thing, is they have a really solid team top to bottom, but kind of lack that top end McDavid, Draisaitl guy, which I do think will hurt them in the long run. But yeah, like you said, just being able to finally show that they can beat them, regardless of whether it's Price or Allen and net. And yeah, I was just really happy with the effort last night. Because like we said, how many times with this team is it back in the day when they would be down 1 or 2, it was just kind of everything, they just folded over, and really it just poured on. So last night, the fact that they had the confidence to stick with it and it just worked out was huge for them.
Brian, what did you think of that play with Alex Chiasson and Carey Price? What we're learning today is that Carey Price is going to be in concussion protocol. He's going to be out for a little bit, at least a week. I didn't see much there. I mean, it obviously was enough goaltender interference to call that goal back, and I agree with that call that it shouldn't have been a goal. But, man, I sure didn't see anything there that would suggest to me that Carey Price was going to leave after the first period with a concussion. What did you think of that play?
I was very surprised. I mean, obviously, whatever happened to him. And I think it just goes to show that in a high contact sport like this, you're always at risk of injury. So, I mean, hopefully Price is going to be okay in the long run here. But I was very surprised. I actually missed the first couple of minutes of the second period and came back out and saw that he was out, and I was texting a buddy saying, what's the word with Price? Like, that was just, I was really surprised. Agree with you. I think it was the right call. There was goaltender interference. That goal should have come back. But yeah, I was really surprised to see that it had knocked out Price. So yeah, it means the Oilers get Allen tomorrow. And although Allen has played well against them this season too, he showed well against them earlier this year too. But yeah, unfortunate to see Carey Price, one of the best goalies in the game, and that could certainly mean something for the Habs in the long run.
Yeah, and that's where I was going with that. Kind of like you don't know exactly where he's at, and is Montreal going to have to go with Allen and a third string goaltender kind of down the stretcher? We don't want to assume too much, and the Carey Price is up. But he finished that first period and then sort of just left and never came back. He was shaking his head a little bit. Brian, I'll stick with you, but let's move on to another injury that happened in that game. Jujhar Khaira got rocked, and now this is the second time this season that he's taken a pretty nasty hit. The first one was in a fight. He lost to Britt Ritchie, got clocked pretty good, and he was wobbly legs. This time it was a clean hit against Alexander Romanov. It just looked like a heavy hit. Like, it didn't look like anything that would have been too kind of whatever, but Khaira was shaken. So he's out. The last we've heard is that Dave Tippett has said he's going to miss some time. What do you think about the fact now that Jujhar Khaira has had 2 potential concussions here in a very short window of time, and this could be problematic for him maybe finishing off the season? Do you see maybe seeing Khaira again before the regular season playoff rollout, or are they better to kind of go, you know what, let's play her safe here, maybe let him sit for a while?
We'll let the experts be the expert as far as that goes. One thing I will point out, though, is I was listening to Bob Stauffer last night, and he had mentioned that the others, I can't remember his name, but the doctor who is basically specializes in brain injury for this team, or brain trauma, his mantra is, if you have 2 head injuries or concussions within a relatively short space of time, you stay out for 3 to 6 months. And so if that is the case, then, he's obviously we're not going to see him again for the regular season, and, likely not the playoffs. It was scary. It was scary watching that last night in light of the fact that, as you mentioned, it was not, what was that, 2 months ago, maybe even?
Yeah, I don't even know if it's that long.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's, it was scary watching that. Big, as you guys know, I'm a big fan of Jujhar, and he's had a tremendous season. It's been I think one of the best feel-good stories on the team this year is this turnaround he's had, and how he's managed to pick himself up off the canvas and carve out a really important part in the spot on this team. Which, all that aside, the Oilers have got to find someone to replace him now. And I think there's options, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But I hope he'll be all right. But and I know they will take whatever precautions are necessary to ensure that he's not back before he's fully cleared to be so.
Yeah, I was actually kind of going to go there next, Colton. Like, what do you think happens now if he doesn't come back, or at least he doesn't come back for a while? He was having an excellent season, like Brian points out, probably the best of his Oilers career so far. How big of a loss is this for Edmonton?
It's huge. Like you guys just both elaborated to, he's having a really big, after kind of some inconsistencies the past few years. He had a great year this year. But yeah, obviously scary to see that happen 2 times in a relatively short time. I can't imagine we'll see him anytime soon. So yeah, I mean, it leaves a pretty big hole, especially with Nugent-Hopkins out. I know he's supposed to be back sooner than later, but it makes the Ryan McLeod call up, I think, which I know we were going to get into later, that much more interesting. Because yeah, I mean, they have Gaetan Haas. He's filling in that second role, or at least this past game, second line role. So I imagine he'll go to the third line. But after that, there's definitely some holes. I mean, we were kind of questioning this team's center ice depth before all of this. So it certainly raises some eyebrows, especially on the penalty kill as well, where Jujhar had a big role. So it's definitely a big loss for this team.
Yeah, we saw last night in the game and Monday, or 2 nights ago, as people watch this video when they see this for the first time, but Tippett went immediately to Connor McDavid and splitting up Leon Draisaitl, so going 1-2. And when you do that, your depth is pretty good because you can go Gaetan Haas in 3 or whomever, right? Devin Shore plays center sometimes, and you've got that depth there. But when you put those 2 guys on the same line, which Tippett tends to do sometimes, and in a game where it's tight and 1-1 and you need that offense, you're going to have to do that. Then it gets pretty weak down the middle. Now, Nugent-Hopkins is skating today. He was at the practice and he was with the regular roster. So it looks like he might not be far away, like you said. But it will be very interesting. Let's get into the Ryan McLeod stuff. Brian, here's a guy that is coming up from the AHL Bakersfield Condors. He's having a fantastic season. He's got 28 points in 28 games. The Oilers seem to be very, very confident in what this kid can do. Now, he played okay last year, but he's really come on this year. He's fast. He's got size. He's not like the gritty type of heavy forward that Jujhar here is, but he's skilled. He kind of reminds me a little bit of a Corey Perry type. He's got that build. He's got that skill level. He's got that, hockey sense. And do you see McLeod being the guy that maybe they can't use him right away because of the fact he's going through the quarantine stuff, but do you see him as the natural fit for Khaira, or do you see somebody else, Brian, on this roster that's going to fill in here for Khaira when he's out?
I don't know if I see McLeod as the natural fit. I'll confess I haven't really seen any Bakersfield games this year. So, I mean, I'm familiar with what he's done to this point in his career, but he should be available. Presumably he is available for Monday's game. So he'll only be out, or we obviously won't be able to play in the second game against the Habs on Wednesday night, but he should be able to go for Monday. And so immediately you start thinking about, okay, is he going to see action right away? I think you want to get him in right away because he'll have been off for about 10 days by that point. Where do you plug him into the lineup? What I'm familiar with this game is that I don't know if he can give you, he can give you some things that Jujhar didn't give you, probably offensively. I don't know if in terms of killing penalties and things like that he can provide the same thing, especially at this point in his career, not having even played an NHL game yet. And, where do you see him fitting in? And I'll throw this to you guys. Is he top 6, or can you put him in and get 10 solid minutes out of him and find a way for him to contribute meaningfully to this team right now in a bottom 6 role?
It's going to be an interesting question because if you've got a highly skilled player like McLeod seems to be, and he doesn't give you the penalty killing and he doesn't necessarily give you the physicality, is he a top 6? I think that's a legitimate question, especially when you can look at the fact that you want to maybe put Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl on the same line. You don't know where Nugent-Hopkins is going to be. It might be better to try to get McLeod with better players, more skilled forwards and wingers, have him in that top 6. As crazy as that sounds, put Gaetan Haas at 3rd, put Devin Shore at 4, and let him succeed with good players around him. I don't know if everybody's going to agree with that take. Colton, what about you? Do you see McLeod as the guy that kind of fits in here where the absence and the missing pieces all go, or do you have somebody else pegged as the right fit there?
It's kind of a wait and see. Like you said, he's still only 21 years old, obviously putting up big numbers in the AHL this year. And they've been high on him really since the moment they drafted him. I know they're kind of surprised they got him in the second round where they did. I think right now they just kind of ease him in. I don't see him getting top 6 action right off the bat. I think it kind of depends, but it's interesting. Like with the quarantine and everything, I think it's worth noting. I don't think they're planning on just having him here to fill in for a few games. I think they see him as probably remaining with the team for the rest of the season, unless obviously he has really big struggles, but I think he's going to be here for a while. So I think they'll give him a lot of different looks in different areas. But I think ultimately the top six makes the most sense, just given that he is a skilled player. I don't think playing him 10 minutes on a team like this makes a lot of sense. I think they would have just kept him in the AHL if that was the case, to keep his minutes up. So I do think he'll get a pretty good opportunity.
Well, I mean, they could have called other people too, right? They could have called Tyler Benson. They could have called Colton Pankiw. They could have called anybody, but they chose Ryan McLeod. And to answer sort of in a different direction, so the question about will they use him and will they keep him? The Oilers have, 4 taxi squad calls after the trade deadline passes. They've already used one on Joakim Nygard. If they use this on Ryan McLeod, they'll only have 2 left for the remainder of the season, right? And who those 2 would be. So if you start to use these players and they just stay for one game, you only have so many. So you can't go crazy just calling people back and forth from the taxi squad. Like once you use your 4, you're done. So if McLeod gets that action, he's got to either stick with the team and hope that everything goes okay, or they made a mistake, he struggles really badly, and now they're down 1 of their taxi squad calls. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens here, how quickly. But Bob Stauffer, like Brian was saying, listen, he seems high on this guy. Like this is a guy that he seems to really, really like. He's been an advocate for him, especially the way he's progressed this season. He's got a huge amount of swagger coming out of the NHL right now. Like he just really has elevated his game, seems very confident in its offensive ability. So it'll be really interesting to see what's going on. I do want to lean though, or at least kind of steer towards the Nugent-Hopkins topic of conversation, because he was back with the team today. He's missed a lot of time, but the Oilers have played quite well without him. And we now have talked many times about Nugent-Hopkins and what his situation is and his free agency and what he's worth and what do you do if you're the Oilers. Brian, what are you thinking here? Like, is the more that Nugent-Hopkins is out of the lineup here, the worse it is for him? Because the Oilers seem to be rolling without him. And I don't want to say they don't need him, because they certainly do, especially for a playoff push. And he's excellent on the power play, but they're clicking on all cylinders without him. And I'm assuming that every day he misses is probably a day that doesn't help him in his negotiations for free agency. What do you think?
Yeah, has he been out 3 or 4 games now?
Well, I don't know. It might even be more than that. I'd have to look to see exactly how many he's been out, but it's been a little while.
Yeah, you're right, though. I mean, they have obviously outside of that stinker there against the Flames, they have played very well without him. Is he? I don't think he's really hurting his value or being out of the lineup per se. I mean, because he wasn't doing much for it when he was in the lineup with the way things are going either. So, they're going to need him. You know who they need. They need Ryan Nugent-Hopkins as the Ryan Nugent-Hopkins that we know he can be, not who he has been in the last month or 2 or 3. They need that guy. They need that guy to show up in the playoffs if they're going to make a deep run. So as far as for what maybe it's doing for his value, I think his value is going to be determined more so with what happens over the next in the weeks to come and however long the Oilers playoff run may be and the role he plays within that.
Has it changed anything for you, Colton, watching how this team is kind of rallied without him? He's not long ago, was a really, really big piece of a lot of their puzzle, the power play, their top 6. He was on that top line as a winger, sort of been relegated to lower roles lately. Has it changed the perspective on what you would do if you're Ken Holland, or how big a priority getting the Nugent-Hopkins deal done is now?
I think like Brian said, just his play earlier, basically this whole year has kind of lowered his value a bit. If he returns and he's the guy like last year, then I think his value is fine and goes back up. But I think it's taken a hit even before the injury. As far as priority goes, I still think there's a big priority to get this signed. And I mean, obviously you want him at his best for the team's sake and for how far they go in the playoffs, but if they might be able to get him at a cheaper deal this year because of it. So it's kind of one of those things. But yeah, I think ultimately how he plays to finish out the season and come playoffs will determine more what his value is.
Talking about guys that have, increased their value this season, Ethan Bear has really come on strong here. We were questioning how effective he was at the beginning of the season. He struggled a little bit. He even got benched for 1 game, but he's been playing excellent hockey over the last little bit. Colton, does it change anything for you with the Tyson Barrie conversation? We're talking about contracts and what's going on here with the way that Ethan Bear seems to be looking like the Ethan Bear of last season, which everybody just fell in love with. He's played so well, and Tippett leaned on him heavy last night. Like Tyson Barrie, I don't know how many minutes he played in the third, but I don't really recall seeing him out there much when that game was really close and down the stretch. and Nurse was playing with Bear, and typically those two guys are partnered, Nurse and Barrie, but that was not the case at the end of the game. So I took two things away from that. One, Tippett is heavily leaning on Ethan Bear when he plays well, and he looks to be playing a lot better. And I think Tippett has decided that Barrie is what we think Barrie is, which is really offensively gifted, but not necessarily your defensive stalwart, so to speak. So he didn't get played a whole lot here. What do you think about how the Ethan Bear play, how he scored last night, how he's coming along and he's getting back to the Ethan Bear that we knew from last season? Does it change things for the Oilers, number one, and does it change things for Tyson Barrie, number two?
I think it still depends. Obviously, he's been pretty inconsistent this year. So I think you have to make sure you keep that all in mind when it comes to going into next year. Which guy are you going to get? Is it the guy, like you said, last year that everyone fell in love with, or is it the guy that really struggled up until just very recently? Like you said, he played over 20 minutes last night, and that was the first time I was looking before in over a month. So he's definitely gaining Tippett's trust back at the right time of the year too. As far as it affecting Barrie, I still don't think a ton, just because, like I said, I don't know if you want to just bank on him having a top 4 role next year. You want him to show this over a longer period of time. But again, like I just said with Nugent-Hopkins, if he's able to finish the year this strong and keep it up in the playoffs, if they go on a bit of a run, I think that certainly plays an impact.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a huge advocate for Tyson Barrie. We've all seen me rant on this show before about how much I like what he brings to the team. But at the same time, I've always admitted, we know what Barrie is. He's not going to give you those huge defensive minutes. He's not Adam Larson. He's not breaking down the cycle. He's not doing – Ethan Bear is a much more rounded player when he's on top of his game. And I'm okay with the fact that Tippett would say, okay, Barrie, we're going to use you here, and we're going to use you here, we're going to use you here, but we're probably not going to use you here in a tight game, physical game. And Barrie did struggle a little bit last night, but he had a great game the game before. Brian, we talked about this last week with the arrival potentially of Dmitry Kulikov and the pairings and the switching things around. How much does last night's game with Bear doing well and being paired with Nurse and then Barrie sitting a little bit, Kulikov coming in, is it really, really, really evident now that these pairings are going to get switched around a lot as the season winds down?
I think so. And, you might as well play mad scientist a little bit and see what kind of combinations you can come up with and what works best in respective particular situations. So you have a better handle on that heading into the playoffs. And, the other thing too, is it sounds more and more like Slater Cuckoo is getting closer to returning too. I mean, there's going to be so many options depth wise defensively with this team. I'm so intrigued. I think Kulikov should be set to debut next Monday as well. So, it's been, I almost get giddy thinking about this, because when was the last time we had this kind of defensive depth that we saw on the Oilers? And you could just play around, it's always kind of trying to figure, well, who can cover this or who can cover that? Now it's like, it's a legit argument about who sits out. And yeah, I think, do mix them up, see what you got, see what you can work with.
Well, it's really interesting for me because there seems to be a person in every category. I don't want to just box them in, right? But Darnell Nurse has turned into a top tier defenseman. There's no arguing that. Tyson Barrie is one of the most gifted offensive defensemen in the league. Adam Larson's the greatest shutting in the cycle. Kulikov is known for being pretty defensively aware. Ethan Bear's got a nice rounded game. Caleb Jones is coming into form. Chris Russell's a shot blocking machine. It doesn't always give you everything that you would hope out of a defenseman, but they like him a lot. You've got a little bit of everybody, right? You don't necessarily have, the huge star, the massive, name marquee defenseman, although Nurse seems to be becoming that. But it's nice because you do have the luxury, if you're Tippett, of moving things around and piecing things together. And in game situations where you're tied or you're ahead or you're behind, you can choose to put people. And they all seem to be okay with eating up the minutes. Like, there's one thing about this team. Nobody seems to complain about their minutes. Like, it's just – Connor McDavid plays I think he played 27 minutes last night. Like, it's just insane how much this guy plays. The defense Nurse is playing like crazy. It's been a very, very interesting year to see how Tippett deploys and structures and moves around his defense and who he's bringing in and out. Although I get the sense, Colton, do you agree that this lineup now, this roster of defensemen is probably what we're going to see down the stretch?
Yeah, I think so. Like Brian had brought up Slater Cuckoo, and I guess it depends when he's healthy to go, but I just think with how long he's been off, I might be wrong, but I don't think he's going to get a huge shot just with how long he's been off. And like you said, they're rolling right now with not a lot of time to go before the playoffs. So I think this is basically what we'll see. Maybe Lagesson gets in instead of Jones again here and there. But again, they have Kulikov coming too, so that changes that a bit. Obviously, he's going to play. So I do think basically what you've seen last night with Kulikov, of course, is pretty well the pairings you're going to get. And then mix and match from there and kind of see which pairings you like best. But I think those will be the guys.
So we've been two more questions before we close things off. We've been keeping an eye on the Connor McDavid race to 100 points. And we've talked about this on different shows. And most of us are like, we'll get really close, but we don't necessarily know if he's going to make it. Let's revisit this now that we got 3 points last night, although he's had some struggles in games prior. Brian, where do you sit? Do you think it's a tall task now? You're the guy that's been keeping some of those numbers in the past. Do you think he's even going to come close? Do you think he's going to get it? Do you think it's going to be miles away? Where do you sit with the McDavid and the 100-point race?
It's funny when you were sharing the show topics with us earlier today, and I saw that the McDavid 100-point chase was on there again. I kind of laughed. I thought, oh, you know what? Maybe, it's at least worth it. We're back in the conversation again. 12 games to go, 26 points, 2.17 points a game. Can he do it? I mean, he can do it. He's got to get really, really hot. He's had a couple stretches like this in his career, but I mean, it's like he's got to go every night. I mean, you think even if he just has, let's say the next 2 games, he gets 1 point, then he needs, he's going to need 25 in 10 games. So, I mean, he can't have more than one off night the rest of the way. But hey, Connor McDavid does Connor McDavid things. And if he does Connor McDavid things for the next 3 weeks, then, why not?
Well, you say that if he has one game, like, the next game tomorrow or tonight when people watch this, if he has 1 point, the percentages go up and the numbers don't work for him. But what if he has 5? I mean, maybe the floodgates have opened now that he scored against Montreal, that beauty that he did. What if he has 5? Then the numbers go way down. Then it gets very, very interesting. Colton, where are you? Do you think Connor McDavid gets close? Do you think he hits it, or this is a moot point at this stage?
No, I'll be the Debbie Downer. Maybe if they played the Senators a couple more times, like 3, 4, 5 more games, I'd be a little more optimistic. But no, I think, is he capable of it? Of course. Like you said, he's continues to defy all odds, it seems. But no, I think that's too tall of a task. Like we said, he's had some off games lately. I can't see it happening.
I have one more question before we close things off, and it's not Oilers related, but I did want your guys' take on this. The story of the week was the Vancouver Canucks. So they were ravaged by the COVID-19 virus, the Brazilian variant. I mean, almost everybody on that team got sick, and they come back in a game that no one expected them to be in, and everybody had ruled them out, and they end up beating the Toronto Maple Leafs 3-2. Now, regardless of what we think about the Maple Leafs, or if we love them or we hate them or whatever, Colton, how big a win was that? How big a hockey story is that? How excited were you to see that Vancouver was able to do that?
Yeah, it's a really good feel-good story. Like we said, we were even questioning on here if they would be able to play it all this season. Obviously it's been a tough few weeks for them. And then just the fact they were able to come off after all that time off and beat who I think everyone would basically agree is the top team in the division. It's interesting too. I'd seen that their playoff chances with Montreal and Calgary both kind of struggling are up to about 20% now. And I mean, I know it's a far shot, not likely, but wouldn't that be something if they were able to just go on a big run here and somehow sneak into that 4th spot?
Well, the way Braden Holtby played, who knows, right? Like he absolutely stole that game for Vancouver, and it was really cool to see. Brian, did you get the chance to watch that game? What were you thinking when it came down to overtime and it looked like that? I mean, just the fact that Vancouver was even in that game, and then nonetheless to win it and Bo Horvat scores twice. What did you think of that game?
I was actually, I watched a good chunk of that game. So I told a few buddies beforehand that, you know what, I think I got this feeling, and I still have this feeling that Vancouver's going to go on a bit of a run here. I think this, they've had so much go wrong. It's us against the world. You could even just tell the vibe when they were coming out for that game. That this is like, this is a motivated bunch that's playing for each other. They got nothing to lose. And so I thought they were going to win that game. So I was kind of giving myself some love when I saw that result. But yeah, no, I think the problem is going to be that they have so many games to play in such a short or a small window of time. You got to think that's going to catch up with them eventually. But I think, as we saw in the playoffs last year, there's some talent on this team. You mentioned Braden Holtby. He's a guy who's been there. He's won that. If he can get hot, who knows? I think they can make things interesting. And I hope they do, because the one thing I kind of feared is, a week or two ago when it was looking like it was pretty much a lock of the 4 playoff teams in the North Division is what's this going to mean for the competitive balance the rest of the way? What's the motivation for the bottom 3 teams in the standings? Not playing in front of fans? How do they get up for games? Are they just going to be mailing it in? I like the fact that Montreal's kind of slipped back a little bit. Calgary's got some hopes they're clinging to, and Ottawa's coming to play every night. So I think that's good. I think, every game is going to be competitive down the rest of the way, and the more teams we can have in the playoff picture is the better. So yeah, I'm pulling for the lead, or for the Canucks. I hope they make things interesting here.
Yeah, typically I don't cheer for Vancouver, but I was really happy to see that game go the way that it did. I've never been, more happy for a team. It in a very different but sort of similar way. It reminded me a little bit of the Golden Knights initial season where everybody wrote them off and they just bound together as a team and just proved everybody wrong. Right now, this is a much different scenario, much different set of circumstances, but you had that feeling that Vancouver was just like, you know what, we are not out of this. We are going to prove you wrong. Maybe we won't win, but we're going to be in this game, and they ended up winning, which was really cool. And to your point, Brian, I think it is very, very interesting that this division is not set yet. Like you said, we all thought it was going to be Toronto, maybe Winnipeg, Edmonton, Montreal. Those first 3 spots are still wide open. Like anybody could land. We don't know who's going to play who. I don't know that Vancouver or Calgary is going to catch Montreal as bad as Montreal might play, but I still get the sense that these top 3 could be wide open and it could be very interesting. And I get more of a sense now after the way that Edmonton pulled that victory out against Montreal that there's no team that Edmonton is going to go up against, even as bad as they played against Toronto, that those games are out of reach now, right? I think that one game last night or Monday night proved that blip against Chicago, and it was just one game, but that blip against Chicago is not going to be repeated. I just don't think the Oilers are going to let that happen again. I don't think they want that same feeling. I think they realize that they were playing a Montreal team that had their number and they were going to put a stop to it. And no matter what game they got played in, they were going to show up, which was really, really cool. Final thoughts, Colton, how do you think the Oilers are going to fare down the stretch here? We don't have many games left. Where do you think they sit? Do you think they go on a run here? Does that game against Montreal really lift their spirits and they go on a tear here to close things out? Or it's going to be like 50-50. They just kind of waltz their way into the playoffs and we'll see where it goes from there.
I think they'll be able to keep on this current pace they're on. Really, I think I'd heard last night they're 9-2-2 in their last 13. So I think they'll keep rolling into playoffs. But again, I've kind of been on this that if there's a first round matchup, I mean, last night does change my mind a bit, or 2 nights ago. I still think I'd rather match up against Winnipeg in the first round than Montreal. But I mean, obviously still you just want to win games at this point and have all the confidence in the world going into the playoffs. So I just hope they can keep going like they have the last month or so here.
Ryan, was that a big pick-me-up builder to that game, or did Edmonton already have the confidence going in there regardless of the outcome that they were going to have a different playoff run?
2 thoughts on this. I mean, first, I think they were 10 minutes away from losing to Montreal again last night. or on Monday night, pardon me. So, I mean, they need to get back and I think make a statement again in the second game that they can play with them. And the other thing I want to get to though is you said the top 3 spots or the 3 spots are wide open. Are you already giving up on first place, making a run to first place? I honestly don't think. I mean, I'm usually the realist here, but I think there's still make a run for first place and then catch the Leafs. I don't. Leafs haven't been that great lately. I think anything's wide open. Winnipeg, I think it even still catch them. I mean, I think things are just top to bottom. It's a lot of fun. It's good to see. Like I say, I think that just makes sure when every game is meaningful down the stretch, that's what we want.
Yeah, no, that's what I meant. I think Winnipeg, Edmonton, or Toronto could wind up finish first in that division.
I'm sorry. I thought you meant the bottom 3 spots. Okay.
No. I think Montreal is probably locked in at 4, but I think those top 3 spots are wide open. And if Toronto continues to play mediocre hockey and the Oilers continue to play pretty well and Winnipeg's play pretty well too, I don't think Toronto's got this locked up at all. No, so it should be it's very, very interesting. All right, guys, I appreciate it. We're gonna shut her off there. So thank you, Colton. Thank you, Brian. This has been another edition of Oilers Overtime. For the Hockey Raiders, check out the YouTube channel, hit like and subscribe to the channel. Check out all the other video content as well. And go to thehockeyraiders.com for everything Oilers related, which we cover on a regular basis, and all the other team action too, because it's an interesting couple weeks here headed towards the playoffs. Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you next week.